Hey there, everybody. Mr. Taylor here again with Muscle Anatomy Part 2, the sequel. And today we are moving on from the generic naming of muscles, and we're going to start looking at the anatomy of our muscular system by regions of the body. So we are going to focus on four areas. We're going to start today with the head and neck, and then we're going to do the back and chest. And then the next video, we're going to learn all about the shoulders and arms. And in the final video, we'll learn about our abdomen and our legs. Unfortunately, there are a couple things that we are going to skip. Um, we're going to skip the muscles of the throat that are used to produce speech and for swallowing. We're going to skip the back muscles. Uh, these are kind of like a lot of posture muscles that help to support your body. There's a lot of them, and they're all named very similarly. The intercostal muscles, which are your breathing muscles, we're going to skip. We're also going to skip the diaphragm. And finally, we're going to skip all the little tiny muscles that are found in your forearm, hands, and feet, which are all very intricate. And just in the interest of time, we're going to kind of skip over those. But if you're really interested in them, they are all in your book, so you can check them out if you want to learn some more. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the muscles of the head and neck, there's 10 of these, and these are definitely not every single muscle found in the head and the neck, but we're just going to cover the major ones that I think are the most important for you to know about. Mostly, we're going to be focusing on facial expressions and movement of the jaw for like chewing and that sort of thing. Okay, so the first muscle we're going to talk about is called the occipitofrontalis, and this muscle is named based off of its origin and insertion. So the occipitofrontalis, its origin is on your occipital bone in the back of the head, and the insertion is the skin of the forehead right above the eye. And if you take a look, you can see this muscle in the illustration here. It's right up here in your forehead. And so what this muscle does is it elevates or depresses the brow. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you an example of this. Hey, there's me. Okay. So what this muscle does is it makes you raise your eyebrows. Like when you're surprised, you're like, wow. That's what the occipital frontalis does. It also does a bit of lowering your brow too. So when you raise your brow or lower your brow, depending on what you're trying to do, it's going to be involved with the occipital frontalis. There's actually a muscle called the corrugator, if you're interested, that's right in here between your eyebrows. That kind of like brings them together. So if you notice, you get like these little folds when you put your eyebrows down, kind of right about where your unibrow starts to grow together. That is the corrugator muscle. Occipital frontalis, though, very surprising. The second muscle on here is called the orbicularis oculi, and orbicularis means it's round or circular, and oculi is like the ocular region, referring to the eyes. So your orbicularis oculi is this ring of muscle that goes around your eyes, allows you to blink hard or wink hard. I guess blinking's two eyes, winking's one eye. Anyway, you can see this muscle in the diagram, makes this ring right around the eye, and so it kind of like squeezes the skin around the eye together to make you close an eye hard. Great. The third muscle on our list here is called the zygomaticus major, and it's named after the zygomatic bone because that's where it has its origin. And its insertion is the skin of the corners of the mouth. And so when it contracts, it pulls those corners of your mouth up towards the zygomatic bone, making you smile. So this is one of my favorite muscles, of course, because it always makes me smile. The platysma comes from the word platus, meaning flat. And the platysma is, you can see it in this picture right here, it's this really thin, flat muscle on the front of the neck. So here is the zygomaticus major up here, going from the corner of the mouth up to the zygomatic bone. The platysma goes just underneath your skin, and it goes from like kind of the corners of your mouth down your neck and hooks underneath of your clavicles. And when it contracts, it makes you do this. Yes, I know. You can barely see it underneath all my chins, but you could probably just see a little bit of like tension in the neck when I do that. And so it depresses and abducts your skin, kind of like when you're frowning or you're scared, frightened, something like that. The fifth muscle is called the sternocleidomastoid, and we talked about this before. It's named after its origin and insertions. It has its origins on the sternum and clavicle, so the collarbone and the breastbone, and then its insertions on the mastoid process, which is behind the ear. And so this is the muscle that makes you turn your head. So when your right sternocleidomastoid contracts, it makes you look to the left. When your left sternocleidomastoid muscle contracts, it makes you look to the right. by pulling the whole head closer towards the body's midline. If both sternocleidomastoid muscles contract at the same time, it makes you look down. So it pulls your head down, or what we call flexes the head. Next muscle is called the levator palpebrae superioris. This muscle, its name tells you what it does. Levator means to elevate, palpebrae means eyelid, and superioris means like superior, like above. So it's literally the eyelid razor that's above the eyelid. And so this actually goes above your eye and then goes down into the eyelid. So its origins on the sphenoid bone all the way back behind your eye and hooks onto the upper eyelid, and it just does this. Opens your eyes. Very eye-opening experience. The next muscle is called the masseter. And the masseter's job is to macerate your food. And this is it right here. It's this big muscle that's on your jaw. You can probably feel yours in the side of your face. It arises from the zygomatic arch, which is this little bundle right here, bone. It is like your cheekbone, from the zygomatic bone back to the temporal bone. And it inserts onto the mandible. So it pulls these corners of your jaw up to make you bite. So when you bite down or chew, you're using your masseter. So it's used to masticate, which is the official word for chewing your food. The next one is called the buccinator, and it's from the buccal region, which, if you remember from the first chapter, are your cheeks. So the buccinator sucks your cheeks in like you're sucking on a straw. Uh, so this muscle, it has its origin along a couple different bones. It goes from your mandible and your maxilla and your sphenoid bone, and it inserts onto your orbicularis oris, which is the muscle around your mouth. And what it does is it sucks your cheeks in like that. Okay, the next muscle is called the orbicularis oris. And the orbicularis oris, once again, orbicularis means circle, and oris means mouth, like oral region. And so its origins on the skin around your mouth and inserts into the corners of your mouth. And this is the muscle that changes the shape of your mouth the most. So when you're talking and you make all sorts of like weird, like, facial expression, you know, um, things with your lips to try to produce different sounds, that's the orbicularis oris is doing it. It's also used when you pucker up, to kiss, if you duck face, that sort of thing. So, because of social distancing, probably not too many of you are exercising your orbicularis oris with another person, and that's probably a good thing. Number 10, the temporalis. This muscle is on the side of your head, and you can see a picture of it right down here on the side of the head, on the temporal bone. And this is the muscle, if you remember, if you put your hands up on the side of your head and bite down, you can feel it contract. So this muscle actually pulls your jaw up towards the temporal bone. So its origins on the temporal bone, inserts in the mandible, and it elevates and retracts your mandible when you're chewing. So it works together with the masseter to help you chew. All right, so here's our overview of our muscles of the face. And you can see all the muscles that we talked about. And there's a lot of other muscles too that we didn't quite have time to get to, but they all work together to make all the different facial expressions, chewing, producing speech, that sort of thing. And then here's the side view of those muscles too. And you can see there's like the masseter and the temporalis, and there's the buccinator as well. And you can see how they all work together to help you to chew. All right, so the next area we're going to look at are the muscles of the back and chest. And there's only 6 of these muscles we have to talk about, but these are all really big, very important muscles. The first one's called the trapezius. And the trapezius is the muscle that, if you ever get like a back rub or a neck rub, this is what people are massaging. It's right there in the back of your neck, and it plays a really important role. So it arises from the C1 to T12 vertebrae. So it starts right there at the atlas and goes all the way down to the bottom of your thoracic region. So it's a pretty long muscle. And it inserts onto your clavicle and your scapula, as well as your occipital bone. And so what this does is it moves your shoulders around, essentially. So like when you shrug your shoulders, that's elevating your shoulders, you're using your trapezius. When you rotate your shoulders, like if you move your shoulder blade around, it's the trapezius. It also can depress the shoulder as well. So the inferior parts can do some depression, and it does some retracting. Retracting is kind of like when you pull your shoulder blades together backwards towards your spine. Another thing it can do is, instead of moving your shoulder blade, the trapezius can also lift your head. And that's probably what it does the most throughout the day. So, when you're going around doing your business all day, it is contracting to pull your head backwards or extend your head at the neck. It can also hyperextend if you want to go that far with it, but usually just extending. I listed on here that there's three muscles in the mink that do the same thing. A lot of animals, like cats and minks, for example, have a few muscles that do the same as one human muscle. So, for example, they have what's called a clavotrapezius, which goes to their clavicle. They have an acromiotrapezius that goes to their acromion of their shoulder blade. And they have a spinotrapezius that has its insertion on the spine of the scapula. And they basically break it down into three different parts, do what our one muscle does. Second muscle is called the latissimus dorsi. And latissimus dorsi, latissimus means wide or widest, and dorsi means back, like your dorsal region. And so if you look at the latissimus dorsi, it's a really wide muscle in your back, which makes sense. And its origins are all along the inferior part of your back, so the lower thoracic vertebrae, and this thing called the lumbodorsal fascia, which, if you look in this picture, if you look right down here, there's actually an aponeurosis back here in the lower back called the lumbodorsal fascia. And so when the latissimus dorsi contracts, it is going to pull the humerus, which is where it has its insertion, back down towards your lower back. And so when it does that contraction, it adducts your arm. It's going to pull your arm down. So here's an example of what that looks like. Hey, there I am. So if you had your arms up in the air, this muscle, latissimus dorsi, is going to pull them down like this. So in arms in the air, it's going to pull the humerus down towards your lower back. So we call that adducting. It also does a slight bit of medial rotation. It's going to slightly rotate your arms in a little bit when it does that. And it does a little bit of extension of the arm of the shoulder. In other words, if your arm is forward, it's going to pull your arm backwards a little bit too, as it's in your back. Next muscle is called the rhomboid major, and the rhomboid major is underneath. It's actually deep to the trapezius, so that's why we only see it on one side. This is where the trapezius has been cut away. The rhomboid major, if you notice, it has its origin in your thoracic region between T2 and T5, and then it inserts onto the medial part of the scapula, and its job is to retract the scapula. So if you think about like rowing a boat where you like pull your shoulder blades together, that is kind of what it's doing. Or think about if you're doing a push up. When you go down for your push up and your arms are kind of spread out behind you or to your side, I guess, you will see that your shoulder blades kind of get pulled together, and that's what the rhomboid does. In a lot of other animals like cats and minks, they don't have a rhomboid major and a separate rhomboid minor like we do. They have a single muscle, so they call it rhomboideus, which means that it's kind of like a rhomboid. The word rhomboid comes from the fact that it has a rhombus or diamond shape. And if you take a look at this illustration, you can see there's our little diamond. So you will be shining bright when you remember that the rhomboid is a diamond shape. Anyway, but its whole job is just to pull your shoulder blades together, similar to the trapezius. And that actually brings me to something that's really important to remember. Most of the muscles in your body work in pairs. So for almost every action that your body can do, there's usually two muscles that do it together. So in this case, the trapezius and the rhomboid major are both working together to retract the scapula by pulling the shoulder blades in towards your spine. And that's why they're located in almost the exact same place. In fact, if you look at the fibers, if you look at the direction those muscle fibers run, you can see they run from the shoulder blade towards the spine. Same thing here, from the spine towards the shoulder blade. And so they're going to pull the shoulder blade in medially, or what we call retraction. And you can see that again. This is a different book's illustration. Same type of thing. So here's your whole trapezius muscle, huge muscle, roughly has a trapezoidal shape. I don't really know how they figured that one out because it doesn't look like much of a trapezoid to me, but use your imagination here. But you can see how all the fibers just run in. And if you can imagine the trapezius pulling your head backwards to extend the head at the neck, you can imagine all these fibers pulling down on your neck to pull your head up. And then you can see here's your rhomboid major down here, and you can imagine these muscle fibers contracting, all those little sarcomeres contracting to pull the muscle together. Okay, so that's it for the back muscles. Let's take a look at the chest muscles. The first chest muscle is called the pectoralis major. And this muscle gets its name because it's found in your pectoral or chest region, and major because it's large. There's also a pectoralis minor, so we have to make sure we don't get them confused. The pec major has its origin on the clavicle and the sternum. So the clavicle, if you don't remember, is your collarbone, and the sternum was your breastbone. So it arises from the center of your chest and inserts onto the humerus. And so its job is to basically take your humerus and pull it closer to your collarbone and breastbone. And if you look at that action, holy cow, flexes, adducts, medially rotates. Wow, that's a lot of different stuff. So let's take a look at that for a second. And there's me again. So I'm going to show you how this works. So if your breastbone is here and your clavicle or collarbone is here, and your humerus, of course, is your arm bone, it's going to pull your arms up and in like this. So imagine you're in the anatomical position. It's going to pull, oh, almost knocked my water bottle over. That's funny. It's going to pull your arms up and in like this. So it's moving medially. So we're adducting. It's flexing because we're moving the arms forward. And it's medially rotating. It's pulling the arms in. So if you've ever done like a butterfly press, it pulls your arms in like this, right? You're pulling your arms immediately. So you are adducting. But because from the anatomical position, you're pulling your arms upwards like this, you're also flexing. So it's a very complicated movement that happens at the pectoralis major, but not too hard for us to understand. So let's take a look. There's the pec major, and you can see it's a pretty large muscle here, and it's kind of shaped like a teardrop. So it's very wide, just goes across the entire sternum and clavicle, and then tapers down until it goes onto the humerus. Next muscle is the pectoralis minor, and the pec minor is deep and much smaller compared to the pectoralis major. That's why we call it the minor. Its origins are along the third, fourth, and fifth ribs. So if you count our ribs, if you remember, so we go first, second, third. There's a third, fourth, and fifth ribs. It's going to arise from those three, and then it's going to come together. It's kind of shaped like a fan. So these three little bundles are going to come together, and it's going to insert onto that coracoid process. If you remember that from back in the skeletal system, that was a little crow beak-like process in the front of our shoulder blade. And from there, what it's going to do, it's going to pull that coracoid process anteriorly and kind of medially towards these ribs. So it's going to depress and protract the scapula. So if you want to see what that looks like, if you were to use your pectoralis major, you'd be pulling your shoulder forward. So it's going to depress and protract. It's going to kind of like throw your shoulder forward like this. So if you think about like if you were throwing a punch, your arm would kind of come across your body. Or let's say you were like reaching for something on the other side of your body, like, oh, I have to get this. You would be using your pectoralis minor. So it's actually moving your shoulder blade around. Think about like if you were like trying to hug yourself, how your shoulder blades have to kind of come forward with your arms. That's what the pec minor is going to do. And in fact, that brings us to the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior is very similar to the pectoralis minor. The word serratus means serrated, like shaped like a saw. So think of like a serrated knife where it's like really like jagged. And then anterior means like anterior, like in the front. The serratus anterior, if you look at it, it's got an origins from ribs 1 through 8. So all along the rib cage here, these first 8 ribs all have origins for the serratus anterior and inserts onto the scapula and inserts a little bit lower than the pectoralis minor. And what it's going to do is it's going to help the pec minor to rotate the scapula and kind of bring it around and protract it. And they call it the boxer's muscle. I don't know if you guys watch a lot of boxing or UFC, but if you ever look at boxers, they'll have like pretty big, strong chests. They'll have big pecs. And then underneath their arms, you might see like this kind of like real, like jagged looking muscle. That's the serratus anterior. And the reason why boxers have really large serratus anterior muscles is because they throw a lot of punches. And they don't really probably throw punches like a rock'em sock'em robot. They're throwing them across their body. They're like throwing bows, whatever. So these fighters have to have really strong serratus anterior muscles. And so we can see, here's another view of the same thing. We can see there is our pec minor with its 3 little bundles hooked onto the ribs. And then underneath of that, we can see here's the serratus anterior. You can see how it kind of looks like a saw blade. And these are both going to pull the scapula anteriorly. Hey, check it out. We made it all the way to the end already. Can you believe it? So you've survived another muscle lecture. We're halfway there. Hard to believe. So 2 more lectures and we'll be all done with the muscles of the body. Thanks for listening and hope to see you guys soon. Take care.